What is up, everybody? In this video, we're going over 10 tips that you can use for your winter photography. Tip number one has to do with condensation. One of the biggest problems with shooting in really cold conditions is when you either go back to your car or going back into a warm building, whether it's to eat or in your hotel room or to your house or whatever it is. So one thing that happens is when you have that really cold air, you bring it into someplace warm, inevitably you're gonna get condensation. It gets on the lens, it gets in the lens, it gets in the camera, it can build up on all the electrical components and everything like that, so it's not a good thing to have. There's a couple of things you can do. The biggest thing, and probably my favorite, is to get a plastic baggie, put the camera in it when it's outside, take out the battery, take out the memory card, and put it in a plastic bag, make sure that it's sealed, and then you can bring it into the house or into the car and into the warm air. What will happen with that is the condensation will build on the outside of the bag and not on the inside, not on your camera. Because if you bring it in, you're going to get that condensation, everything's going to fog up, it's going to be a long time before you can use it. And that's at the very least. At the very most, you're going to get that water and it's going to sit on that computer board, it's going to sit on those electrical components and the little circuitry that's in your camera, and it can build up over time, fungus, things like that, so, and mildew and that kind of stuff. So you want to stay away from that. So putting it in a plastic bag, sealing it, then bringing it inside after removing your memory card is the best way to go.
Tip number two we have for you is to wear obviously proper clothes, and that also includes very good gloves. So what I usually do is I wear two pairs of gloves, one that is like a liner and is very snuggle to your finger, and then another one on top of that which will keep the wind away. And then what you have to look for if you're buying the gloves is that they have these little touchy fingers, so that you can actually touch your touchscreen on the back of your camera and use it for all of your buttons that you have to push, and that just makes your life way easier.
Absolutely, and you know, the ones that I have are made by Mammut, which is a Swiss company, which I believe are yours too. If you have the liners, the good thing to do is you have the fold over mitts, so when you're ready to mess with your camera, you can just kind of take that off, your fingers are exposed, and you can use a little touchy thingy on your fingers to touch the touchscreen or your phone or anything like that. Tips 3, 3. Tip number 3. Tip number 3, guys, batteries. Batteries, they're so important. One thing that happens in very cold weather is your batteries will drain at an extremely high rate. So there's a couple of things you can do to kind of somewhat prevent that. One, you don't shoot Sony. The second, kidding guys. The second one is keep your batteries close to your body. Even the one you're going to use in the camera, what I recommend is until you're ready to actually use your camera, keep the batteries in your pocket somewhere close to your body to where it's going to use your body heat to keep them warm. Also, what you can do is use one of the hand warmers. If you don't have like a pocket that's close or a way to secure the batteries close to your body, another way is to get those hand warmers. They're very cheap, under $5 or $6 I think US, and get those activated and put them in the pockets with the batteries. That will make them last so much longer, because that's one thing you do not want, is to get out there in the cold and one battery dies and then you go to get another one and they're all dead too. Once you get them back into a warmer, back into a home or into the car, they'll show you that they're full again, but while they're in the cold, they will drain very fast. So whatever you gotta do, don't keep them in your bag on the ground, or keep them as close as you can and as warm as you can at all times. Do you have anything else? I covered that.
Can't say anything, you're such a waffler. Okay guys, tip number 4 is to actually use manual focus. So what happens if you have like a snowy scene where there's a lot of white in your photo, your autofocus can have problems to focus because there is not enough contrast in the picture. So what you want to do is, or may want to do, is switch into manual focus and zoom in on the scene, maybe something that is a little bit darker, and then build your focus from there. So tip number 5 is to expose to the right. So what actually can happen if you're out in the field and photographing a snowy scene with a lot of white, your camera meter will read it as gray. So what we suggest is that you're bringing up your histogram in your camera and expose to the right. So that means that your histogram is more leaning toward the right hand side, and with that you make sure that all your white is actually white and not grayish and maybe underexposed. So what you do is you overexpose a little bit, maybe by 1 or 2 stops, and that will make sure that your whites are white.
Tip number 6, white balance. Now, generally, if you're shooting raw, your white balance isn't going to matter all that much. If you're shooting auto white balance, it's okay. However, me personally, I like to shoot my white balance on Kelvin and manually adjust it. The reason why it's a little more important when it comes to winter scenes is your auto white balance a lot of times will make it more of a bluish tint, and again, like I said, in post-processing it's not a big deal if you're shooting raw. However, when you combine the setting a white neutral balance, in other words, I'm looking at the white balance on my camera and trying to match it to what I'm actually seeing with my eyes as close as possible. There's no real scientific method for me when I'm doing it out in the field. I just try to match it with what I see, and then combining that with exposing all the way to the right as far as you can without blowing out your highlights. Those two things right there will give you the best file to work with when you get it back into post-processing. And so usually, guys, like I said, if you're using auto white balance and everything looks fine, then I wouldn't worry about it. But if you are using auto white balance and you see that it is wrong, or see that as maybe adding more of a bluish tint, then that is an option for you guys. Like I said, I prefer it. I always shoot in manual white balance anyway. So for me, getting that back into post-processing with that file, the best file that I can get is huge, and that makes a big difference for my post-processing. Maybe. It's up to you. You're the creative genius behind the post-processing now. So.
I'm the brain now.
The brain.
You're just an actor.
What do you want to do today, brain? Make another tutorial to take over the world.
So guys, tip number 7 is don't be afraid to go out and photograph during the day. Usually in landscape photography that's not something that you would do because it's very high contrast during the midday. But in the winter the sun is coming up very late and it's setting very early. So you will have that diffused light almost all day, especially if there are clouds or just if it's partly cloudy. They will give you a lot of opportunity to photograph out there all time of the day. So don't be afraid to go out and photograph during the day.
Alright guys, tip number 8, simplicity, minimalism, picking out subjects. That's one thing that you can absolutely do with winter photography. Snowy scenes, bringing out your macro lens, doing things like snowflakes, picking up frost on plants work really well. Looking for contrast, small scenes, things that you would normally, I find that I do whenever conditions aren't very good. Like here in Arizona, we have really clear skies a lot of times, and what I'll do is I'll forget the big landscape, forget about having the sky in it, and concentrate on light and finding small subjects, slowing down, looking on the ground, looking at just different things that I normally don't look for when you have really great conditions and golden hour and lots of clouds in the sky and things like that. So concentrating on the details, thinking minimalistic, finding single subjects, which is really great with the long lens, picking out individual subjects and things like that.
Also guys, for that tip, you don't have to be in an area with mountains and epic scenes. Even if you live in an area that is flat and maybe you have cows nearby and there is a fence and maybe it's snowed in almost all the way, and then you have 1 or 2 of these poles peeking through the snow, that could make for a very nice, simple and minimalistic shot right there. Absolutely.
And another great subject is trees. Trees usually have dark branches, dark bark on the trunks, and when the snow sits on top of that, you get some really beautiful contrast. you add a little bit of light in there, and you can really have some really beautiful small scenes.
Tip number 9 is, I forgot the tip. Tip number 9 is to photograph water. And that's like such a big subject, because during winter you have water in all kinds of forms. You have it as fog, maybe hovering in a forest. You can have it as maybe a half-frozen little river or creek, and the edges usually are frozen and the rest just flows through your image. You can photograph icicles. And then what also looks very, very beautiful is when the ice in the spring, when it starts to crack and refreezes again, and all of these details you can have, and it makes for very beautiful shapes and patterns.
And tip number 10 is don't be afraid to shoot black and white. A lot of times, because of the weather and the clouds, shooting during the day, all these tips we've already told you guys, black and white works really well with snowy winter scenes. It's already kind of a monochrome scene anyway, for the most part, whether you're shooting trees or details or water or anything like that. Most of the time there isn't a lot of color, but there is some really nice contrast and really nice tones in the image that really lend itself well to black and white. Like this photo here that Chris took last June, actually, in Bachalpse in the Swiss Alps. We were there, and you can see here this mountain peak that's covered in snow, and then in the foreground you have this kind of patchy snow with green grass. She flipped that black and white, and it's absolutely stunning because of the amount of contrast between the grass, the snow, the rocks, and then the ice and snow on the peaks. Just made for an absolutely beautiful scene, perfect for black and white, so that's really something to keep in mind.
Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye.